Okay, I'm going to start this project completely from scratch. So I'm going to make a new repository, and this one is HTML3. So I'm going to go ahead and call that one HTML3 public, initialize it with a README, and then I am going to, let's see, that was already taken. There, we'll make it 4. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create this repository after I put in the README. Again, I'm at GitHub here inside. It's always easier, I think, to create the repository first. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open this in desktop, cloning it, my new repository, and open it with the GitHub app. And you can see that this is opening up in the desktop in that GitHub folder in an HTML4, and it is going to create my folder. This is why it is so much easier to start from creating the repository. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clone. Okay, now on my desktop, if I go take a look at my desktop, inside of my GitHub folder, I have a new HTML4 folder that has nothing except for that hidden Git folder, which you may or may not see, and this README. So I'm going to go ahead, since I am using Dreamweaver, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a new repository, or excuse me, set up a new site. I'll talk about doing this in Atom and in Brackets or whatever tool you're using, but I'm going to make a new site. Call this HTML3, which is what it is, and it's confusing because I've made my repository called HTML4. There it is. So I choose that, I save, and now I am ready to go. Okay, if you are doing this inside of Brackets or Atom, remember that the first thing that you need to do is open those up after you create your repository and the folder is created. Then go in and file and you will open the folder. Now I don't have that option here because this is Dreamweaver, but you always want to have your files showing. So if you have Atom or Dreamweaver, they'll be over here on the left side. If you have the conventional layout here in Dreamweaver, I have my files over here on the right side because I want to see what's in that folder. Okay, so I have this particular layout that I made in Photoshop. Cancel that. Here's my Photoshop. Excuse me, I just laid out this. And here, let me blow this up a little bit here. Command plus. So I want to talk to you about the elements that are in this. You can see I have a background element. A background image that is the smoke that is coming up. I have a web font here because whenever you make a website, you are generally stuck with whatever is installed on the end user's machine. So if you want to use a cool or interesting font, if they don't have it installed, it's not going to show up. But with web fonts, you have more options, and Adobe has Adobe Web Fonts, which is one of these, but I'm going to show you how to use both Adobe Web Fonts and Google Fonts, which are free. Another thing that I have down here is I have a trademark, but the most, which is the symbols. So you should be doing your reading, basically doing that last third section of the HTML, which goes over some goes over some things about layouts and things. And also I'm going to give you a section in the CSS tutorials that is going to cover a lot of what we're doing today. So make sure that you do your readings and everything that I assigned to you before you try to get in here and do this, because this is going to be a little bit complicated if you have not, and if you don't have any background in what you're doing. So let's get started. So let's break down this image a little bit. So I have here a header, I have a nav bar, I have 2 sections or 2 articles, and you can see that I have a space between them. I have a layout that is centered inside of a page, and I have a footer. So when we go into the layout, I have this big box that is centered, so that's one element. Then I have the header, second element, navbar, third element, fourth element, fifth element, sixth element. So my HTML in this page is actually only going to be made up of about these 6 different elements. Now, I'm going to be using semantic tags, which as you've gone through your readings today in the HTML sections, it should have all of those semantic tags. So I'm going to go into my Dreamweaver, and I'm going to call this, because the project is called Smoke Diner or something like that. I don't remember what I called it. I made it Smoke Diner. Okay, so that's my header. That's what's going to show up on the page. Now I'm inside of the body, and the first thing that you have to think about is that box that goes around everything, that holds everything in place and gets centered on the page. If you look at something like, for instance, this, you can see here is a box that is centered on the page. It's holding in all the contents. And then you have all of these different elements coming in. Now their header bar goes the whole way across, has some elements that are outside of that box, but you have to think of the one box that holds everything together on the page. So let's create that. And I'm going to use the div tag, and I'm going to give this an ID because I only have one of these, and this is going to be my main container. I'm going to call it wrapper. Doesn't matter what you call it. A lot of times you'll see me alternating. I'll call it container is a really common thing to call it. Sometimes you'll see class container, and you'll have multiple containers. Okay, now you see I have this open and closed because this is the main box that holds everything together. Everything else is going to go around there. So kind of hold the picture of that we had in your head. So the next thing that I'm going to have is the header, which had that title in it. It had smoke. Then I had a nav bar, and I could be using all of these divs. Divs are just kind of like just generic box. But because everybody used like div ID equals header, div ID equals nav, div ID equals article, div ID equals section, whatever, what have you, they actually created what they called semantic tags. So my next one is going to be my nav bar. And in there I had a list, which was the about, the smoke, well, no, about, I'll have to go back and look at my thing. But it will be an unordered list, an undecorated list. And then I had the right and left sections or articles. So in this case, I'm just going to make 2 articles. Class equals left. Now I'm going to have the article class equals right. By the way, this is not the only way to make a layout. This is called the box model with floats and clears. And it's a good basic way to get your foot wet, get in and learn about headers, or to learn about margins and padding and basic layout. Now as you get a little bit more advanced, you're going to start doing grid layouts, but that's kind of a different ball of wax, and you have to have, even before you get into that, you have to have a really good understanding of margins and paddings and things like that. So that is kind of starting at the beginner way. If you go out in the real world today, you probably wouldn't necessarily use this, but it's a good getting your foot wet method for you as you get started. Okay, so my last thing that I had in here was my footer, where I had my copyright. See, this is popping these things up because it does recognize that these are things. So I had in here copyright 2020, and then I'm going to put in, we're going to talk about putting in the trademark symbol. So I don't think, oh look, it did. I put in the trademark symbol. That's one way that you could do it. However, we'll see if that actually shows up on all servers. It's probably a little bit safer to put in our code for it. Because we're going to talk about special characters, and I want to cut this and put this here. We're going to talk about using special characters and putting emojis and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this, and since I'm going to be running this on GitHub, it has to be saved as index. And now, believe it or not, this is basically all the core HTML. Everything else we're going to do is going to be done in CSS. Except for putting content. We've got to put the pictures and stuff, but all the layout and everything else is all CSS from here on out. In the interest of time, I went ahead and built this page, and I'm not going to have you watch me building it, but I'm going to go through and show you all the code and everything that I did to create this site. Also, I'm going to make sure that I highlight everything that is on the rubric. So where we left off in the previous chunk is I had created all of my source code. I've created the wrapper. I put the header and H1 tags inside of the header, the smoke. I created the nav bar, and so I had this nav section, but what I did here was I created an unordered list. These are my list items inside of the nav bar. You've created a list before, so that should not be very challenging. Inside of my article left, I put the image with an alt tag, and inside of my article right, class right, I put in the text that we had in there. And if you're using Dreamweaver, this is kind of a fun little thing that you can do, by the way. Dreamweaver has a built-in lorem generator. Otherwise, you can get lorem on the web. Just look up Google lorem generator. This line is so long. Let's see here. Okay, so to go in here to get some lorem, all I'm going to do is type lorem, the number of words I want in 2 digits, and then hit tab. And it gives me a lorem for the page, which is nice. Okay, so I added that lorem, I added the stuff in my footer, which we saw, and that's it. That is all the HTML that I have. So you'll notice here that in Dreamweaver it shows that they're attached. If you're in Dreamweaver, it shows that I have this main CSS attached. You'll notice that I don't have any CSS in my page. That is because I'm doing everything on an external page, which is a really good habit for you to get into, because then you could have, 100 different pages that are styled the same way, but if you want to make a change on there, change the font or something, all you have to do is change the one place on the CSS, and bam, all your pages are changed. So the way that you do that is you create another document. I have main.css, so it would be file, and all of your things it's going to be file new, and make sure that you're saving it inside of here, and you're going to make sure that it has the CSS ending, and then all of your CSS will go into this page like this. So it looks exactly like it would if it was between style tags inside your head or internal style. And the code is exactly the same as it would be if it would be an inline style in your tag. There's no difference. It's just a matter really of where you put it. The other thing I want you to show you, since this is linked, okay, so that is all the HTML. Now my CSS which since Dreamweaver is here, I can just click back and forth like this. The way you connect that once you create your new sheet is you type in this line inside of the head, link href, and then the path, whatever your path is, to your CSS. My CSS happens to be sitting here next to my index page, so easy peasy. And then type text.css and relationship rel equals style sheet. So that connects there. That is perfect. So now the next thing, you can see here I have another CSS attached. And what that is to use online code or online text. Now in this case, I had gone into fonts at Adobe. And since I logged into my account, hit Browse Fonts here, and you can go in and you can add, you can see I was looking for smoke. If I wanted to change this here, I can just go in and say, I want these two fonts. And when I'm in Adobe, I would activate these fonts so that it would be able to show up in my accounts, in my font stack. But that's really just a design thing. The way that you go ahead and you use this is you say, add this to a web project. You have to say what project it is you're doing. Here I have smoke already selected. And then this will give me the code to use. So this gives me there, once I do that, it gives me the code that I put in my head, and also here's my font families. So if we go into Dreamweaver, you can see that I took these font families and I put them inside of the header family here. So there's that line of code for a different font, obviously. Now, if you don't have Adobe, that doesn't mean that you can't do web fonts. What you can actually do is go to fonts.google. And it's going to work exactly the same way. You can go in here and kind of check the categories of fonts that you want. You want something handwritten, for instance. That's going to be selected. I could go in here, say I wanted this one. It's going to give you the code for it. Where does it give you the code for it? Embed right there. So here's the link that you put into the header, and then here's what you put into your CSS. So that's how you use a Google font or an external font. The purpose of this is because otherwise the only font that somebody can use is what is on their computer. So if you want to use a cooler font and it's not installed on the end user's machine, before you would have been kind of out of luck. But now we have these options, so this is great. Okay, going back to Dreamweaver. Okay, so another thing you can see here when you look at this, I put a background image here so that my font could go on top. So I had my image, which is just the smoke, it's in here regularly. And my background image, the way that that goes in is it has to go onto the body of the the body of the document. So it's background, URL, images, smoke. In this case, I told it no repeat because I only want that smoke image to show up once. If you have an image that, like a line that you want to repeat all the way across the page, you can actually repeat X and Y and put lines or polka dots or whatever you want to do. I don't know why I have this here twice. That's really not necessary. And background cover, I'm telling it that I want it to cover the whole document. So that smoke is one big image that just covers the whole back. Okay, my wrapper, and notice, by the way, that background image is in the body. The wrapper, that is that box that controls everything. Remember, if we go back into this source code, it's the box that goes around everything. The things that I had to say about that were that I wanted it to have a width of 900 pixels. So how big is that box? In this case, it's 900 pixels. And this is a line that you just have to kind of memorize, this margin 0 auto. That line just is what centers your container on the page. You're going to have to maybe sometimes put some height into these. Here's my header. I wanted my header to be 100% of the width. And since it is contained inside of the wrapper, even though I say 100% and my page may be 1,000 pixels wide, the wrapper itself that contains the header is only 900 pixels wide. So that is going to be that big. Here you'll notice that I am streaming together header and H1, because if we go back in here, I have header and H1. I may have other H1s on the page, but the only ones that that style is going to apply to are the ones inside of these header tags. So you can see here I gave a font size, and in your readings that you should have done before this, there's a lot of references to different things that you can do with CSS. There's also a great reference for all kinds of things that you can do. But if you're using one of the tools that I gave you, actually you should have hints popping up telling you what you can do to some of this, to these things. So I have here my font size, my font family. I told it to align to the center. That's how I got it to go into the center. Also here, this is interesting, my color RGB. This last 0.7, you guys should all probably be familiar with RGB. That's our red, green, blue. Here I say 0.7, so it's actually a little bit transparent. It lightens up the text a little bit. Opacity runs between 0 and 1. So this is 0.7. So 1 would be completely opaque. 0.7 has a little bit of transparency. With my nav bar, you'll see that my nav bar goes 100% actually across this area. However, it is centered in this page. You'll see that I changed the color, like these are not the typical blue. When a page is active, it has a line under it. Actually, I want to change some of these colors. But you can see it when you roll over them, they turn a little darker gray. I have to have my active not be red because I don't really like that. But I have it underlined when active. I don't have all these other pages yet, so you can only see that this about is active and it is underlined. So how did I get that to work? If you go into, I'm actually going to zip up this project and I just give it to you. So you can see in here that I have down here in my navigation, I have styling for the UL, the unnumbered list that is in my navigation, and the style is none. Margins and padding are 0. You have to play with margins and padding a little bit. If you imagine a great big box, you get a great big box from Amazon, and inside are several different boxes, and between the boxes they have those big air bubble things, and then inside of the boxes they have the styrofoam that holds the project. So if you look at the big box, that's your wrapper. The air bubbles that keep all the boxes from knocking around, those are margins because it's inside of one box. And padding is what is inside of your containers that hold your actual content. That being said, something that is a padding for one object can be a margin for another. For instance, I say that the padding is something that is inside of a box, keeping the contents from rolling around. However, if you look at the wrapper, the great big box that holds everything, the padding inside of that box is actually would be a margin for the boxes that are inside of it. I believe that there are some good descriptions of the box model inside of your reading today, so you'll learn more about margins and padding there. Things also here, this display inline. Display inline is making the things, rather than going up and down, they're going across in a line. So here, if you look at this, rather than a list generally goes up and down, if you want it to go across, that's your display inline. So again, here on these things, there's nothing all that scary. I align to the center. This is important. In order to get these boxes to be next to each other rather than going down, appearing one on top of the other, I have this float left and this float left. Floating left, if you've ever worked in a word processor, that is what makes things like words wrap around pictures and things like that. That's called floating left. So this I float left, and this I also float left. I put a little bit of margin in between the two of them so that they're not bumping up against each other. And then to have this not float, I have to say clear, because that clears the floats. It's one of those things, and it doesn't necessarily have to make sense. You just have to memorize it. After you use floats, you use clear. So if you look at this, so this is left, right, and then footer, right? Article left, article right, and then footer. So let's take a look at the CSS code. You can see here I say float to the left, right, float to the left, and then the footer is, I have it above here, I see clear both. And if your footer is floating up behind things, that's what's going to drop it down to the bottom, is to clear both. And really, if you look at this, there's not a whole heck of a lot else going on in these things, my alignment and declaring my font families. Okay, here's how I made my links. So I have A links. If you look at these things there, that means that they're navigation. So let's take a look at the code in here. See, I have my link, and then it's an A tag with the word. So the A is the anchor. That's what helps us navigate. So that is what we're going to be calling in the CSS. So I go back into the CSS, and links can either be visited, you have your hover, you have your active, which is a page that it's on. So all of my links should share these characteristics. I don't have anything for visited links here. But when it hovers, remember I changed it. It went from being 0.75, actually it's the exact same color. I have 0.75 opacity normally, and then it goes to 1 whenever I hover over it. So that's that 1 right there, that there. So let's go ahead and take a look at live. You see how it gets a little bit darker? That's just the opacity, actually. So I'm going to zip this code up so you can take a look at it. It will be inside of the module. And that is really pretty much all of your project. If we go into let's take a look at the module here. Module. These are all of your objects here going on. I think we talked about pretty much everything. So let me know how it goes. Let me know if you have any questions.